Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 12 of my 2023 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Oh Snap, Sweet Christmas, and Thanks a Latte. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with the large mug, and I wanted that to be aqua blue. So I chose BG11, BG13, and BG15 for that, starting with the darkest shade, that BG15, on the outer edges. I'm going to do equal shadows on both the left and the right, and leave a nice highlight down the center so it looks nice and shiny. So the darkest shade on the outer edges, and then I'm coming in with the mid-tone, the BG13, and pulling that toward the center, making sure to catch the edge of the BG15 and pull it into this mid-tone. And I'll bring in my lightest shade, the BG11, and I'm going to repeat that same process, making sure to go over the edge of the BG13 and just soften that color into this highlight shade so that it eliminates any harsh lines. And I did work over that a few times to try to soften that BG13 edge, and then I'll add that color to the back rim and the curve of the handle as well. And then I decided that it was looking a little bit pale. It is the largest image in my little scene here, and so I just wanted it to be more vibrant. So I'm going to do a second layer of all of that coloring, just going right over where I originally had it. And that's just going to help deepen the saturation level and also smooth out the blend. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to move on to my little gumdrops. I wanted those to be aqua blue as well, but I wanted them to be just a little bit different. So I'm going to add in BG18 to those. I'm putting a little BG18 down in the bottom right corner, just to add a bit of depth, and then I'm actually going to cover that up completely with the BG15. The BG18 is a little bit dull, so the BG15 is going to brighten that up, but still maintain a little bit extra depth in that corner. I blended out with the BG13 and then added a little highlight in the top left area with that BG11. Next, I'm going to work on the coffee or cocoa in the mug. In my case, it's going to be a mocha. I wanted to do like a peppermint mocha theme for this card. So the whole color palette is going to be inspired by peppermints. So for the liquid, I'm using E43, E44, and E47. Just a little E47 first to create some shadows and some depth, especially under those marshmallows, and then blending out with the E44, and then I use the E43 for the middle part on the other side of the marshmallows. I did want to add just a little bit of shading there with that E44 and then blend it out with the E43. For my marshmallows, I'm going to use E000 with E40 and E41. It's going to give them kind of like a soft, creamy hue. I'll also be leaving parts of the cardstock white so they don't look brown. I still want to maintain that they look white, but just have a bit of shading to them. So I'm starting with the E41, adding a touch of that, blending out with the E40. But those shades are a bit dull as well, so I wanted to add in the E000, which is just going to warm them up a little bit. It has just a tiny bit more of like a peachy tone to it, which I think looks nice, especially as these dry back a bit. I'm going to use these for my little meringues as well, adding some shading on the lines, just choosing one side of the line to highlight, and that will just really add a lot of texture to those. Just following the lines that are drawn there and making sure to stay close to them so that I have enough white space for them to read as white. Then I'm going to move on to my peppermints in the top left, and I realized that I really didn't need the E40, especially in those smaller areas, so I just skipped over it, and I did the same for the two candy canes, the curved one and the stick. Just started with the E41 and blended out with the E000. Then I'm going to move on to my gingerbread man. And I decided to go with like a lighter gingerbread combo. Sometimes I use combos that have a little bit more red in them. It just depends on how I'm feeling. But to match this color palette, I decided to go with E31, E33, and E35. I put in a nice shadow with that E35 first, and then I'm blending that out with the E33. And then I'll come in with that E31 and just add a bit of highlight on the face and the tops of the arms, in the center of the body, and then also down the legs. And I think that looks really nice. I'll add R20 to give him some rosy cheeks, so he looks nice and cheerful. And then I'm going to move on to my reds. I'm using R24, R29, and R39. And I'm going to do this little scarf that wraps around the mug. Just adding that R39 wherever I want the shading to go. So I put it on both the left and the right to match the shading of the mug itself. And then also where that fabric is kind of folded over and knotted, that would also be in more shadows. So I went ahead and placed that there. And then I'm blending with the R29 for the mid-tone. And then I'll use the R24 for a nice highlight. And I added more highlight on the right hand side because that fabric is knotted over toward the left. And then I'm going to continue using these shades to do all of my red stripes for all the rest of my candies. So for the peppermints, I decided to put the red on the inner part of the swirl, and that way I could have a highlight on the outer edge. That seemed to make sense. So I'm just carefully coloring in between those lines. And because I did the white parts all at once, that part was able to go a lot faster. And then I just have to fill in the red. And since the red is so much darker than those creamy white shades, I can just cover over them. And it'll look like I took the time to shade each individual stripe, but really I didn't. It was just a quick little hack there. So I'm going to finish those peppermints. They took a little bit of time because they were such little lines to color in. And then I'll move on to my candy canes. And I'm going to put that R39 on the inner part of the staff of the curved one. And then I decided to put it on the right hand side for the stick. This could also be a straw. It really is up to you. But it's going to be sticking out of my drink, and the gingerbread man is going to be to the right side. So that's why I decided to put the shading on the right, because he would be casting a shadow there. So it helps to kind of know where you're going to place things on your card to figure out the highlights and the shadows. But if you don't get it perfectly right, it's not a big deal. I don't think it's that noticeable in the end. So I'm just filling in all of those stripes and adding a bit of highlight to them, making sure that everything is colored in nicely. And then I'll also do the little buttons on my gingerbread man. Then I'm going to take a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just add some shine marks to my candies. So this is only going to go on the candy canes and the peppermints. So all of the candies that have red and white stripes. I'm not adding it to the gumdrops because I want to add some glitter to those later on. But I will take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and go over the eyes of my gingerbread man to make those bright and shiny. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I'm going to be using some pattern paper. I'm using a sheet from the Lawn Fawn Nitpicky collection, which came out last winter. I'm going to go with this soft aqua snowflake print. And then I'm also going to take a sheet from the Spiffier Speckles, which came out this winter. And I'm going to take this white with a little gray flack. I'm going to die cut the snowflake print with the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables. So I'll line that up where I want it on the pattern and tape that into place with some post-it tape. Then I wanted to cut a window into that, so I'm taking the largest of the small stitched circle stackables and taping that into place as well, and then I will run that through my die cutting machine. The circle itself I can save for another project later on, and the great thing is that the print also works for winter if I don't get to it before the end of the holidays. But for today's card, I'm just going to be using what is left behind, which is this large frame with the circle cut out. I did want to add another layer to this though, so next I'm going to take a panel of Lawn Fawn mermaid cardstock and I will line the pattern paper right over top, and then I'm going to take the second largest of the large circle stackables and die cut that, so we get a window that is slightly smaller. I trimmed down the outside edges of that mermaid panel, and now I'm adding some glue to that, and then I'm going to line up the pattern paper right over top of it so I have an equal amount of that mermaid cardstock showing through around the opening, and then I will smooth that pattern paper down into place. So that also adds a nice little extra detail, and it gives that pattern paper a bit more stability. I've added some foam tape to the back of that, so I'm going to peel off those release papers. And in the meantime, I have also cut down my little flecked pattern paper from the spiffier speckles. So I used the foam tape to pick that up, added a little extra liquid glue to the back, and then I'm going to adhere that to my card front, which is also made from Lawn Fawn mermaid cardstock to match that inner edge around the window. So it is a standard A2 size card, 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. Next I'm going to work on my sentiment, so I've taken a piece of Barn Red cardstock from Lawn Fawn, added that to my Misty, and I'm treating it with a Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool, and then I will stamp my sentiment using Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grips a hold of the powder and holds it in place until you can heat set it. The sentiment that I'm using is from the Sweet Christmas stamp set, and it just says, "Have a sweet Christmas." So I stamped that down a couple of times until I could see that it was even, and then I'm going to coat that with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder until it's nice and legible. I'll tap off any excess from the back, and then I'll heat my heat gun off to the side until it's nice and hot. And then I like to bring it to both the back and the front to try to minimize some of the warping. Just try to keep that cardstock as straight as possible, and also keep that powder from burning. Sometimes if you heat only from the front, you can get little scald marks. I'll pop my card base in my Misty, and usually I do like to stamp on the inside of the card before I've added any foam tape to the front, but I forgot this time, so it worked out fine. I'm taking a row of gingerbread people and a sentiment from the Lawn Fawn Simply Celebrate Winter stamp set, and I'm stamping that down in peacock ink, and I'll stamp that down a couple of times to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I am ready to start assembling. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this little coffee mug and a finger blade. I forget what these are called, these little ones that you hold with your finger. But anyway, I'm just going to follow the lines of the back rim of the mug and also that marshmallow that kind of overlaps the back rim, and just cut that out the best that I can. To be honest, I'm not great at this. It's not something that I do very often, and I was having a little bit of trouble following that line and still making it look nice. I accidentally cut a little bit into the top of the black line of the marshmallow, so I'll end up fixing that later on. It's not a big deal, but I just wanted to have a little slit in there so that I would be able to insert my gingerbread man and my peppermint stick. So once I had that cut through enough, I will take that little gingerbread man and figure out where I want him to be, kind of poking out, and also that peppermint stick, making sure that I have the shaded side next to him since that's the way that I wanted it to be. And then once I have those positioned the way that I like, I will flip that over and take a little piece of post-it tape just to hold it together until later on when I can pop it up with some foam tape. So now I'm ready to start adding these images into that little window that I created. So I'm going to start with the mug and remove the foam tape that I added to the back of that and pop that up kind of in the center. I'm just making sure that the placement is just about right. His head might be just slightly closer to the top edge than the bottom of the mug is, but that's okay because there's going to be a lot going on down at the bottom and I needed room for that. And I will be using a combination of liquid glue and foam tape, just depending on where the images are placed in this scene. So I use liquid glue for the scarf that wraps around the mug. And then I know I'm going to need a bit of foam tape for parts of the candy cane. Parts of it will overlap the mug, so I want to be careful with my placement. And I'm just kind of laying that in position for now until I make sure that that's exactly where I want it. And I also am going to add just a little piece of foam tape to the back of these two meringues, because once again, part of them will be overlapping the mug and part of them will be overlapping the outer edge of that circle, but some of it will be just on that white pattern paper, which is recessed, so I want to make sure everything is nice and flat and on the same level. So that's the reason for the foam tape. I did also stamp out the little branch from Winter Birds with some Noble Fir ink, just to have a bit of greenery in the scene to kind of fill it out and just make it look a little bit more festive. So I will be placing those around the bottom of the scene as well. And then once I'm ready to commit to the placement of those larger images, I can peel off the release papers, add some liquid glue if needed, and if I didn't need it, I didn't bother with the liquid glue because I knew that I was going to need space to be able to tuck things behind each other, especially like the greenery for these larger images. I wanted that kind of coming out the sides. And so I knew that I was going to need space to be able to tuck the stems behind these three main images. So I just trimmed down a thin strip of the Scotch 3M foam tape using my Cutter Bee scissors. They're Teflon coated, so they just cut through it like butter and the tape doesn't stick to them, so those are really nice. And I'm just tearing off pieces from that thin strip and adding that foam tape behind the images as needed. And if I didn't want it to be popped up, then I just used the Barely Art Precision Craft Glue instead. I wanted to add another little pop of red over on the right hand side to balance out the candy cane. So I'm going to do one of the little peppermint twists. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't thrilled about the way that the top of the marshmallow came out when I cut the space for my gingerbread man. So I'm going to fill the top of the mug with some of these little marshmallows that I colored and die cut out. It'll also add some extra dimension because they just stand out a bit more. So I'm just covering up the ones that were already there. At first I was going to leave the one that was on the left as it was, but it just didn't look right to me to have the two with the white edge and then the one without it. So I did decide to add that third marshmallow in there and just cover up all of the ones that were in the liquid originally. So I'm continuing to work on the bottom of my scene, and as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about the weight of the different objects, trying to balance out the size of things and also the colors. So when I add something to the left, I want to make sure that I add something of equal value to the right. And the same with the colors, so I brought in that little peppermint twist on the right hand side to balance out the candy cane on the left. And now I'm going to bring in two little white marshmallows on the left to balance out the two white meringues on the right. So it's kind of the things that are going through my head as I'm trying to compose a scene. And you know, I don't want everything to be like perfectly matching, at least not all of the time, but I just want there to be harmony. I hope that I'm explaining this right. I hope you can see visually what I'm talking about, even if the words that I'm using aren't perfectly correct. But anyway, I'm going to add another one of those greenery pieces down in the center, since I didn't want an extra one on the left or the right. So that kind of filled in some of the space down below. And then I'm adding one of the gumdrops popped up on foam tape right above that in the empty space that was there. Then I'll add two more and just create a little trio. I'm going to put the one that is on the right just slightly set apart, just again, so it's not perfect, but you know, it just looks visually appealing, you know, and unified. And then I was trying to figure out the placement of this second little peppermint twist, and I decided to place that on the left hand side. I'm going to have that overlap an extra gumdrop, and then I'll have the last gumdrop to match it over on the right. And all of those are going on the pattern paper frame that is popped up, so I'm just using liquid glue to adhere those. I trimmed down the sentiment with the smallest of the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment banners, and while I was popping it out, I noticed that there was just a little smudge of some embossing powder on there. So I grabbed my Tombow Mono sand eraser, and I'm just scrubbing over that cardstock in that spot until it disappears completely, which it did. And then I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that, and I will line that up right below the little clusters of images, just straight across the bottom of the card. And then, of course, it needed some glitter. It wouldn't be a Christy Gets Crafty Christmas card if it didn't have any. So I grabbed my Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to add that to my marshmallows, also to the meringues, and to the gumdrops. And I always like to add my stickles to the darkest shaded parts of things because I think that's where it stands out the most. And then I felt like that top right area was just a little too empty. So I went back to my Sweet Christmas stamp set and found this tiny little heart. And I think that finished off the card nicely. So I will lift that up so you can see all of that sparkle and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I am in love with this color palette. I think it is just so beautiful. So I really hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button. Leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. Make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products I used will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I will also put up day 12 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series in case you'd like to keep watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!